Walt Disney, a father of two young girls, would take his daughters to a park in LA. He was captivated by the carousel. He could see it in a distance, that they had horses and they were moving. And, he was compelled by the sound of the music, that distinctive sound. And he headed down to take his kids to play on the carousel. But when he got there, he discovered the horse he was to sit on didn't move. It was chipped and the paint was coming off. What he saw in the distance wasn't what he got in reality. And this disappointment, this letdown, became the birth of a dream. A dream where all the horses jumped and the paint wasn't chipped. He wanted to create a place that had excellence, where people could come and be part of and engage in a magical experience. Fast forward, we see his dream come to reality. Earlier on this year, I took some of my team on a research trip. We were researching what happens at Disneyland. The reality is, the very vision that was so compelling for Walt Disney has birthed many, many adventure theme parks, many movies, has transformed our society because of a disappointment and a letdown that engaged in something much bigger, that looked beyond now to what could be. If you want a great read, look at the narrative around Walt Disney's life. Incredible to see how it twisted and turned and changed, and then what has become. Yet we shouldn't be surprised, because the narrative of story is embedded in us by our Creator. You see, we are hardwired for story. As we gather around our table, that's a place of story, a place of imagination, a place that helps us not get locked into now and define our life by now, but an understanding that story develops and evolves over time. You see, no matter what you're facing now in this slice of history, that doesn't define you and who you are and what's to come. Because the way God created us is that we have our stories that connect with each other's stories under God's big story. You see, stories over time bring perspective. Because without that perspective, we could be locked into the now and we think that this is it. But that would be so wrong. You see, this thief comes to destroy, to take away our vision of the future, to squash our dreams. But what if there was more to it than that? What if our story was a story of encouragement? What if our story actually showed God's story in action for those around us? You see, because we are wired for stories, we engage in stories, even ones that are not ours, as if they were our own. You just have a look at television. Anyone sort of locked into a television series, or Netflix, things like that, you go, you want to know what's going to happen next? Don't you know it's just a story? There's something in us that wants us to step into that, and we feel what the characters are feeling. That's the design of the authors. You see, we want to engage with story because we can understand our world that way a lot better. That's the way that God puts the narrative of His story into story. His book, His Bible, is a story. His story of incredible love, frustration, disappointment, forgiveness. You see, that's the power of story. Story impacts every generation. And it impacts generation, whether it's our God story or a story in life. Because, you see, marketers and the people like Disney actually capture into the way that God has made us. Now, I'll give you a couple of lines from a couple of movies. This is a recent one. See the line where the sky meets the sea? It calls me, and no one knows how far it goes. Who sings that? Moana. Yes, you're right. Okay. This is for a little bit, for those who are a little bit older. The very things that hold you down are going to lift you up. Think elephant. Dumbo. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Here's a little play on another saying. The seaweed is always greener in someone else's lake. That was The Little Mermaid. What about Finding Nemo? I love that movie. And you have all of these fish being caught up in one big net, and Nemo's going the other way. And, Dory's going the other way. Just keep swimming, just keep swimming. See, little lines like that gauge in our story. The number of times I've said to myself, just keep swimming. You're probably really wondering about me, but you do the same thing in different ways. I love what Walt Disney actually said through Tinkerbell. Laughter is timeless, imagination has no age, and dreams are forever. What if that was true? What if that really was true, that God created us for laughter, that God created us for imagination, and He places within us dreams that He wants to fulfill, dreams that will transform the way we do life. You see, we all need stories. We all need stories. It helps us to understand the why behind the what. You see, when we tell stories, we communicate values. If you in your home want to actually instill values in the next generation, then you have to understand that you've got to tell them why you think what you think, why you believe what you believe. Not just we go to church, but why? What's that compelling reason that draws us into God's story? And it's not just on the positive things as well. What about those times that we have tough times? How do our kids see the values that we are being played out? And do they understand the why? The why behind the what and the how? Because here's what we know, is that the what and the how can change. Unless they know the why, they're going to go after different things. But when they know why, it kind of grounds you and you understand what you do. I was watching my mum cook, and she was a really good cook, and she would cook steak. She would cut the ends off the steak, just a little bit, and cook the steak. And I said to her one day, Mum, why do you do that? She goes, well, my mum did it. Maybe it keeps the steak tender or something. So I thought, I know, I'll go back to the source. Went to my grandmother and said, Nana, why do you cut the ends off the steak? And she laughed, and she said, you know what? My pan wasn't big enough, so I would just cut little bits off the end, and then it would fit. Okay, why do we do what we do? It's good to understand the why behind the what and the how, because we can see whether it's still going to stand. But you see, understanding what engages us, understanding that story is part of our need to create a life pattern. Story helps us make decisions. Story gives us perspective, and if we want our next generation to understand how to do that, we need to help them understand why we make the choices that we do. Because they are founded in something, but what are they? You see, stories shape perspective. You see, we all need stories. We need cultural stories to shape perspective. You know, one of the roles that I had at Crossway, I was working with our Asian ministries team, and that's why I love the fact that Alex is joining the team as well here. Actually, it was Alex I was working with in Australia. All Chinese pastors called Alex. That was a bit really rude, wasn't it? No. But you know what? One of the things that they say to me is to talk with parents and goes, Mark, what you don't understand is that we've come to a new country and we want to embrace the values here, but we want to also embrace something of home. And their biggest concern is that their kids will not understand what it's like to have been in their homeland and lose their mother tongue. How important it is for understanding perspective. You see, we know that even a child who does not know their parents have something deep inside of them that wants to understand where they've come from. Now, that's not unusual to us because God created us that way. We need family stories. We need to understand that there are stories around our family units. I was given this wonderful book. I'm really grateful for it. I'm not going to show you it all because there's some photos in there that are of me that are very embarrassing. But what it is there's some stories here that are being told from families who I've been able to journey alongside. Now, some of these stories, I had no idea that God had used something that we'd said or done that would make a difference. Very humbling. You see, here's the thing with family and story, is that you get to play in somebody else's story as well. When we don't just create our own story, but we have stories that we're intersecting with other families. And this is why our table is inclusive. This is why it doesn't matter whether you are married or single, whether you're old or young, no matter what your past is, what your future, everyone has a place at the table. And everyone has a story. I know that last weekend at Crossway, 94 children took a big step to follow Jesus, led to Jesus by their parents. Now, that's not part of my story now. The big idea, the big step, was something I had helped create. But the story goes on, and great celebration. Because we actually know that a decision made to follow Jesus in the age bracket of a child sticks better than any other decision to follow Jesus. It's not that those who follow Jesus later in life don't have a real conversion. They absolutely do. But so do children. You see, that's the power of story. It sets a backdrop for life. You see, we need to shape stories around our spiritual lives, how we use those 40 hours that we have together, leverage the influence against the 3,000 hours that we have in a year. That's why it's so important, because we're leveraging the power of story. And it's not just our story singular, it's our story together. We create a narrative, and that narrative points people to Jesus. You see, stories shape our perspective of ourselves. You see, a story moves us from where we are to where we can be. A story will help us see beyond the now. I was working with equivalent here, a year 13 student, and she had decided, along with her parents, that she wouldn't serve in our children's ministry in her final year because she was going to study. And I go, yeah, right. You're not going to study on a Sunday morning. But anyway, I thought, okay, let's just watch the story and be there. Now, as we could have probably predicted, some of the decisions that she made were not honoring to God. She was figuring out what life was all about in her view. And it became a problem for her and her parents. Her parents didn't know, how do I re-engage this young person in the faith? How do I re-engage? She's just walking away. Many of you may have experienced that for yourself or with others. And I had this moment where I believe God inspired and said, invite her to come on the mission trip with you. I'm going, well, I don't really need anyone else on the mission trip, but yeah, sure. So I went to this young woman and said, would you come and would you help me teach English in a local primary school? Would you come along with me? Now, here's the thing. I say to young people, I'm not going to tell you you're significant, but I'm going to give you something significant to do. You see, the thing about story is if we just focus in on now, we get the very small picture. When we focus in on what could be, that opens up a whole big range. So what she did is she came with me on that mission trip. What I didn't know was what God was going to do with her in that space. He ignited a passion for her to teach. And she goes, I love teaching. I want to do this. And I go, well, you can. She's a teacher today. It ignited something in her that changed the course and the direction of her life. Why? Because we gave her a bigger challenge than what she could cope with. but we walk the journey with her. See, the thing here is the fact that if you are just content with now and not thinking of what's beyond you, then you're not going to have that faith, that stretch experience. See, the power of story helps us see beyond now. The power of story gives us a better perspective of ourselves. You see, we sabotage kids' faith when we allow them to be spectators. You might wonder why I've made the call to say our high school students need to be in a serving environment. I've done that because I know the power of significance and the power of a young person sitting alongside another younger person figuring out their faith. That is a power place that is asking you to step out of the spectator stands and onto the playing field. See, that's what engages the hearts of young people when you're serving in an area where you feel that you've got something to contribute. See, stories help set in motion that which is God has placed within us. But sometimes we deviate from that plan. And I love the way Nathan, the prophet Nathan, addresses some stuff going on in David's story. Now, David is described as a leader, a man after God's own heart, but he did some pretty dumb things. And he'd just been with Bathsheba, and Nathan, the prophet, had to step into a place of using story to challenge David. Listen to how it unfolded. The Lord sent Nathan, the prophet, to tell David the story. There were two men in a certain town. One was rich and one was poor. The rich man owned many sheep and cattle. The poor man owned nothing but one little lamb that he had bought. He raised the little lamb and it grew up with his children. It ate from his plate and drank from his cup. He cuddled it in his arms like a baby daughter. Well, one day a guest arrived at the home of the rich man. But instead of killing the animal from his own flock or herd, he took the poor man's lamb and killed it and prepared it for his guest. Well, David, as you can imagine, was furious. As surely as the Lord lives, he vowed, any man who will do such a thing deserves to die. He must repay 4 lambs to the poor man for the one that he stole, for having no pity. Then Nathan said to David, you are the man. Wow. You see, David had launched right into that story, that justice thing. Oh yes, we've got to have the way. It's got to be right. We've got to put this right. Whoever, and Nathan says, it's you. Imagine the difference it could have been if Nathan goes up and says, I need to talk to you about something. I need to tell you, you've got to stop what you're doing. But here, David entered into the narrative, and God used that to change the course of his life. Now, David was willing to hear. We're not always willing to hear. Was it easy? I don't believe it was. In fact, when somebody corrects me, I want to curl up like a 2-year-old. But I also want to be told. How sad it would be if we're never pulled up on the things that we're doing wrong because we convince ourselves that we are right. Here's the power of story. Someone else's story, our story. You see, it's a story that we share with someone, not something we do to them. Not only does story shape us as individuals, it shapes the way we see others, our perspective of others. You see, the forgiveness, grace, and compassion is all about us interacting with other people. Our kids are going to be looking at compassion for the next few weeks. Caring enough to help someone in need. Why is that important? Because it's not just about us. See, the power of story says we can be engaged in someone else's story. We can be the hero for somebody else. We can help somebody else get onto the right path. It's not okay for us to step back and say, well, your choice. See, being part of the family of God is understanding stories that can change our perspective of others. It can also help us appreciate others. We have this ideal of what this person should be. Maybe kids, you have an ideal of what the ideal parent would be. You have no idea what it's like to be a parent. Maybe some of us might sit there and go, well, what about that family? Oh, they shouldn't be getting it together. You have no idea until you've walked in their shoes. Let's not be a people who judge others, but let's try and understand through the narrative, understanding their story, what it's like to walk in their shoes. That's the sort of church I want to be part of. See, Jesus used the power of story so well, and those who engaged in it could learn. I think of the Good Samaritan and the way that Jesus told that story, and it was really for the benefit of those around going, who are you in the story? See, Jesus knows that we engage in a story. Who are you in the story? And those who had ears heard. And those who've refused to walked away, but the story was told. And I think sometimes a story, when we hear it the first time and then we reflect on it, that may change things for us. The first time we hear it, we may disengage, but the story is something we can engage with more than just content. It tells us something and it leads us somewhere. See, stories shape our perspective of God. And if we don't handle God's word wisely, our kids will begin to think that this is just a whole lot of disconnected stories. I don't know how you feel about God's narrative. Everything in here is here for a reason. What is God saying to me? What am I going to do about it? Why is this here, God? What would you teach me? You see, if we just talk about story by itself without the context of the meta-narrative, the bigger story, then it just becomes individual seeds. Now, here's the thing too, for our life story, if we just think about now and not the past and the future, we're actually just seeing isolated stories, but they're all interconnected. Because God tells his story through his word of love, forgiveness, and trust. And what he wants us to do is to write that story. He wants us to give him the pen and go, you write my story and I'll be obedient to what you're saying. Now, I was thinking about it, what would I recommend that you would do? What would be, there's something in the power of story that I would think needed to be included in everyone's story. And I came up with something that was very, very spiritual, but you might not realize how spiritual it is. It's actually something that will engage people in your own family, but also engage in our church family. It's something that's compelling, and it's really, really hard. Maybe. Are you ready for it? The one thing that you can put in the mix of your family that will revolutionize the way you're doing things is fun. Yeah, how spiritual is that? Come on, let's go fun, yes? Try it again. Let's have fun, yes? Yes. So here's the thing, is that sometimes we're busy fixing our kids, not enjoying them. Sometimes we're busy fixing our neighbours, not enjoying them. Fixing our work colleagues, not enjoying them. How about doing things randomly just for fun? Now you might say, well, that might be you, Mark. Sometimes in seasons of my life that hasn't been a lot of fun. I can remember a time when I was going through really tough stuff and I thought my world was all crashing in. And I took up clowning. Now, part of it was because I didn't feel confident in speaking. And so when you had the whiteout on the clown face, you didn't have to speak, you just had to act. And so underneath, to be honest and candid with you, I was crying out to God and going, I don't know what's going on. Everything I hoped and dreamed for is coming apart. Put on the clown face and out there in the supermarket, with trolleys and communicating the gospel through that means. I haven't done it for a while, but that's okay. I do fun in other ways. But what that taught me is that God is in laughter. God is in fun. I can remember it was September 2004. I can remember that because I remember the movie. I actually had our kids at home. Brian was away for the weekend, and it was coming up to my birthday. And so I was about 10:30 at night, and I thought, let's do something. Oh, my kids are here. 2 younger ones were in bed. My eldest one was with a friend. And I said to her, hey, do you want to go to the movies? She goes, Mum, it's 10:30. I go, yeah, should we go to the movies? She goes, sure. And her friend was going, oh my goodness, my mum would never do that. And Rochelle just said, well, my mum wouldn't do it if Dad was home. Anyway, so I go into our youngest son and wake him up and go, Liam, do you want to go to the movies? And he goes, yeah, do we get burgers? He was waking up out of sleep. He goes, yeah, come on, let's go. So he jumped in the car and went to the movie. It was appropriate, by the way. I just want you to know that. And anyway, so they got the burgers, we went into the movie, and we're watching this and having a great time. And it was like, wow, why are we doing this? And we just ticked over midnight, and I go, anyone want to sing happy birthday to me? Because it's now my birthday. And my kids were like, would you be quiet? The movie's still on. We were the only ones in the theatre. You know, something for fun, random, just because. You know, the other thing that we tried, which you may or may not want to do, is, have you ever wondered what would happen when you go through a car wash and wind down the windows? Yeah? It's kind of fun. Yeah. Again, I borrowed my husband's car, and then we went to, no, we go, oh, let's just try it. The kids were in the car, let's do it. Okay. You know, sometimes we take life too seriously. Now, actually, I want to know or ask you, when did you last laugh as a family? When do we laugh in church? I want that to be a regular thing, because something happens when we laugh. See, laughter is a gift from God. Fun is something that we need to build into our families. It helps shape our story when we can laugh together. What it does too is that it seals over things like forgiveness. You see, when you can forgive someone and you laugh together, that changes the narrative. Sometimes we get too serious and we need to think about, how do we laugh just because? So our challenge as we're wrapping up today is to think about, how can God craft the narrative of our story? Are we allowing him to do that? Are we allowing him to take the pen and write our story? Are we allowing him that laughter moment? Are we allowing him to build a strong family that has perspective? Are we engaging in someone else's story as well? You see, that's the way God created our story, with someone else's story, connected under God's meta-narrative. See, he designed us all to be at the table. No one is excluded. No one is disqualified. If you're feeling disqualified or condemned, that's not coming from God. I apologize if it's ever come from the local church, because that's not our heart. You see, everyone has a place at the table. Everyone has a story. And in that story, we want to be able to bring that before God and go, we want to worship you, God. Here I am to worship. I want to bow down before you. I want you to write my story. See, here's the deal for me. I planned out my life as a young person, and I decided all these things that I thought were going to be great. And you know, most of them haven't come true. And I'm so pleased they didn't. I've had so many more experiences that were just out of my mind, that I wouldn't even believed had have been part of that. You see, God had a bigger plan than I did. And when we allow God to write the story of our lives, that changes things. And you have a powerful story. Share it. I have a powerful story. Share it. And when we share our stories and share in creating the story together under God's big story, there's a story of love, forgiveness, redemption, and inclusion. As David and the team come back up to lead us, I want us to reflect in on how we're doing in our family unit. And this could be a flat It could be a friendship group. When we talk family, remember we're talking about spiritual family as well as biological family. If the joy of the Lord is our strength, how strong is your family? How strong are your relationships? How strong are we as a church? And this is not coming from a place of condemnation. It's coming from a place of freedom. That God would want to craft his story through us. And no one is out of God's story. God holds up the mirror to us through his word, and he says, this is who you are. This is who I am. And nowhere in there does God give up on us. Nowhere should a parent ever give up on a child. Should a friend ever give up on a friend. What is God saying to you, and what will you do about it? How can we stand together and craft a story that those around us will know that we've been with Jesus? What's God asking you to do, and how will you respond? Father, you're speaking to each and every one of us in different ways. I pray that as we sit in this space, we'd feel that your love and your acceptance is paramount. That the things that we are journeying with, and no one knows what it's like to walk in our shoes right now. But God, that we would sense your spirit doing what only you can do. May we lean on you. May we laugh with you and be a people who build our strength upon you. Thank you for our biological family, even for its challenges. Thank you for our friendship families that we have, people that matter to us. Thank you for our church family, a place where we all belong. May we know the power of you, Jesus, restoring relationships, bringing laughter and hope for a future that is in you. We pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.